Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dakota's Political Circle. And today I want to talk about how Trump is basically putting a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico for several reasons, actually, and also a 10% tariff on China. Now, the reasons being behind Canada and Mexico is because of drug trafficking, the cartels specifically in Mexico, but drug trafficking, I believe, fentanyl and stuff when it comes to Canada and also Mexico. But for Mexico specifically, the cartels, illegal immigration, stuff like that. That's the reason Trump's putting it on Canada and Mexico. Now, when it comes to China, it's more of like a tactic to get China to basically get a better trade negotiation and stuff like that. Now, Trump does state that it's more of a different reason, but I think it's more or less that. But I will read this article for you just to tell you what ended up actually happening. Because in response to him putting tariffs, and a lot of people hate that Trump wants to put tariffs on people, because I will actually explain to you exactly why tariffs are good and bad. But at the same time, I'll show you exactly why this was a good thing, because Mexico, China, and Canada responded. Now, China responded in a different way than Mexico and Canada did, but I'll explain to you why this was a good thing for Trump to do this. Not a lot of presidents like bringing out the tariff negotiation, but when Trump's always put tariffs on the table, it always ends up being a good thing. Now, when it came to China, it's a little bit different, because China has a massive advantage when it comes to tariffs, because they can just put the same thing on us. Now with Canada and Mexico, it's a little bit different. They could put the same thing on us, but remember, we have a massive amount of money and stuff like that. Like we just have a bigger economy when it comes to that than Mexico and Canada. When China's a little bit different, because they're just as massive as us. But I'll read the article for you first. So officials from Canada, Mexico, and China have warned the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's pledge to impose sweeping tariffs on America's three largest trading partners. Now, they are the three largest trading partners. Obviously, the largest would be China compared to the U.S., but the smallest, Mexico, second smallest, Canada. So, yeah, that's that. To one tariff will follow, this is what the Mexican president said, to one tariff will follow another in response, so on, until we put a common business at risk. Trump vowed on Monday night to introduce a 25% tariff on goods coming from Mexico and Canada, and an additional 10% tariff on goods coming from China. He said the duties were a bid to clamp down on drugs and illegal immigration. So that's exactly why Trump said that. Now, when it comes to China, it's a little bit different, but that's mainly for China. That's mainly for Mexico and Canada. Canada's Prime Minister. This is actually interesting right here. So Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he spoke to Trump in the hours after the announcement, and planned to hold a meeting with Canada's provocative leaders to discuss a response. So basically, these tariffs are, I mean, his Trump coming out saying he's going to impose the tariffs really drove it into Canada and Mexico, because it hurts their economy so badly, because a lot of everything that comes into Mexico and Canada is from the U.S. That's the big reason here. So it's going to hurt them in a massive amount, basically. A spokesperson for China's embassy, now this is China, but they said no one will win a trade war or a tariff. Which, I mean, for China, it's a little bit different, because China is a really massive economy, and just like us, they are not going to really get too much blowback from it. But I do think Trump's doing like a strategy where China tries to negotiate a better trade deal with the U.S. so they don't have to have a tariff war. I think that's what he's kind of doing with China. Now with Canada and Mexico, I think it's different. The international pushback came a day after Trump announced his plans on social media, True Social. Trudeau said his country was prepared to work with the U.S. in a constructive way. This is a relationship that we know that has certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. In a phone call with Trump, Trudeau said the pair discussed trade and border security, with the Prime Minister pointing out that the number of migrants crossing the Canadian border was much smaller compared to the U.S.-Mexico. So basically, he's throwing Mexico under the bus, and trying not to get those tariffs on, which is actually kind of funny. But So Trump spokesperson added that the world leaders had sought to develop stronger relationship with Trump because he represents a global peace and stability. Mexico's president on Tuesday said that neither threats nor tariffs would solve the migration phenomenon or drug consumption, which she basically said a letter and stuff like that. She said that Mexico had taken steps to tackle illegal immigration into the U.S. and that caravans of migrants no longer reached the border. The issue of drugs, she added, is a problem of health, public health, and consumption in your country's society. And noting about car manufacturing, if tariffs go up, who will it hurt? General Motors. Yeah, technically that's true. While a spokesperson for China's embassy told the BBC that China-U.S. economic and trade negotiations is mutually beneficial in nature. Yes, that is true. He denied that China allows chemicals used in manufacturers of illegal drugs. That's probably false, including fentanyl, to be smuggled in the U.S. So basically, Trump's blaming China also for the fentanyl stuff, which I'm not sure if it's true or not, but at the same time, I think China kind of deserves the tariff in a way. Currently, a majority of what the two countries sell each other is subject to tariffs, which is 66% of U.S. imports from China and 58% of China's imports from the U.S. He called on them to not panic. This was Trudeau told lawmakers the idea of going to war with the U.S. isn't what anyone wants. He called on them to not panic and stuff like that. But yeah, Canada sends about 75% of its total exports to the U.S. That's their exports. Canada's most popular province said on Monday that the proposed tariffs would be devastating to workers and jobs in both Canada and the U.S. I would say more Canada than the U.S., though. To compare us to Mexico is the most insulting thing I've ever heard. So Canada is really mad about Trump comparing them to Mexico when it comes to illegal immigration. So this is like a big blowback to Mexico. Now, obviously, the Mexican president is controlled by the cartels, so I wouldn't really care what the Mexican president says regardless. And when it comes to Canada, it's a little bit different, but I think it's hilarious that they're just basically bashing Canada so they don't get any tariffs whatsoever. So they don't want to protect Canada at all, even though they're like allies. And also the Canadian dollar dipped below 71 cents, the lowest level it has fallen since May 2020, when Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Canadian goods during his first stint as U.S. president. The Mexican peso fell to its lowest value as well. So basically, this is horrible for Mexico and Canada. So they're basically both scrambling together to try to get Trump not to impose these tariffs. And basically, this is most likely this is what Trump wanted. He probably wants them to get their crap together when it comes to illegal immigration, especially Mexico. And obviously, Mexico is saying they're going to be getting everything together. They've already talked to Trump. They want to get everything together, just like how Canada does as well. But Canada's kind of a little bit more mad because they said we don't have that much illegal immigration or drug trafficking like Mexico does. But most likely what Trump is going to do, in my opinion, is basically put a tariff down, but if they do not improve their illegal immigration problem and drug trafficking problem, then he will keep those tariffs on. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, with a tariff, I'm actually going to get to my next link. It'll actually tell you what a tariff is and all that, and basically what it ends up being. Obviously, a tariff isn't a good thing, but it's also not a bad thing. It's very mixed signaling when it comes to a tariff. Now, I'll actually read it for you. So this is an article talking about it as well. So what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on imports or foreign goods bought into the U.S. Who pays for the tariff? This is a question that many Americans ask. Trump has said that foreign countries pay tariffs, but tariffs are actually paid by American companies. So if an American car manufacturer is importing a part from Mexico, it will have to pay a tariff. And remember, this kind of trickles down. So it would be the car manufacturer pays more, but they would up the prices. Now, this is in theory is a bad thing, but at the same time, I'll read the rest just to show you what this exactly means. U.S. companies imported 1.2 trillion from Canada, Mexico, and China in 2023. The three countries are the U.S.'s largest trade partners. The tariff on all three is essentially a tax on those imports. Canada is a major exporter of crude oil and other gas products to the U.S. Mexico has become a major car and auto part exporter as well. Does Trump need congressional approval? I don't think he does, but I'll read it anyway. The Republicans have the majority in the House, which means Trump has the power, a lot of power in Congress to pass legislation, but the president also has the power to enact tariffs without congressional approval, which I kind of thought that was true. but I guess they can also fight it in court with legal cases and such. But like a national emergency case. Why is Trump levying tariffs? The U.S. imports more on goods than in exports. The trade deficit. Not all economists agree that the trade deficits are bad, but Trump has railed against them for years, and tariffs are his preferred tool to deal with them, which not many presidents usually want to do that. Tariffs become a big deal in 2018 during Trump's first term. He levied tariffs on products from China on metal imports. He also threatened to put tariffs on imports from Mexico in retaliation to the large immigrant problem, which what's crazy is it did go down because of that. In other words, this is a bit of a deja vu, the way tariffs work in Trump's mind, and I don't want to read that. They're just kind of blaming the blame game. Do tariffs impact consumers? Consumers will almost surely feel the impact of price increases, which is true. This is true. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Trump campaigned on implementing a 10% to 20% tariff across the board, with 60% tariffs on imports. Estimates have calculated that such tariffs could add between $1,900 to $7,600 to household costs. Executives from American companies, including Walmart and such, have all said that they would ultimately have to increase their prices because of tariffs. How will other countries respond to tariffs? Which obviously not kindly, because no one wants to be tariffed. After Trump put tariffs on Chinese imports, China puts tariffs on American imports, including soybeans and corn. Basically, it's kind of like a tariff war. They talked about it before. It's basically like a tariff war. But with countries like Canada and Mexico, it's a little bit different because they can also implement the same tariff. But remember, Canada and Mexico have it's more severe to Canada and Mexico than China. When it comes to Canada and Mexico, because of how much they get from the U.S. compared to how much we get from them, and also because of how poor Mexico is and also Canada is compared to us, it hurts them more than it hurts us, which is a good thing. But at the same time, it does hurt consumers. That is also a bad thing. That's one bad thing about tariffs. It hurts consumers in the long run. But when the tariffs get handled in the long run, it is a good thing as well. So I'll actually read this. I actually did this on ChatGPT. I said, if Trump does a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, who would end up winning the trade war? So if former President Trump were to impose this tariff, the outcome would be a trade war. So this would be the impact on the U.S. What would be a good thing? U.S. producers in protected industries in steel, aluminum, or agriculture that compete directly with imports from Canada and Mexico will benefit in the short term. Domestic employment and protected sectors, some jobs like in the industries shielded by tariffs will be fine. The U.S. Treasury tariffs will generate revenue, at least temporarily. So there will be revenue. There will definitely be revenue because of it. The losers, U.S. consumers, obviously, U.S. consumers will get price increases. They won't probably be massive price increases, but they will be price increases. Exporters, retaliatory tariffs from Mexico and Canada could harm U.S. industries as well, but probably not horribly. Maybe China, but Mexico and Canada probably wouldn't be too bad. Businesses using imported inputs, companies relying on Canada or Mexico inputs like auto manufacturers could face higher production costs. And then impact on Mexico and Canada, which remember, also another reason I want to say, if, like, for example, if car manufacturers are having to pay more to import from, like, let's say Mexico, then they can just start importing from, like, America if it's cheaper. So that's also a reason tariffs are good, because in the long run, if they start importing more from the country they're in, like America, or if they do it from another country, for example, America will benefit a lot more because they are not, and it'll hurt those countries a lot more because they will be benefiting from it. But the countries like Mexico are going to be doing way, way worse because a big portion of them is the manufacturing of cars. So if they don't get those, like, that money generating from those car companies because they're backing out of getting those cheap, formerly cheap prices, then they're just going to go to the U.S. and get those prices instead. That's also a big advantage of the U.S. compared to Mexico when it comes to certain goods. And that's a big good when it comes to Mexico because that's their biggest thing. It's auto manufacturing. But imports on Canada and Mexico, for them, non-U.S. trade partners. They could find new U.S. trade partners, which is kind of unlikely. I wouldn't say that's going to happen, but it's unlikely, but it is possible. They could have domestic producers. They can have more local businesses to fill the gap. Now, I think Canada can do that somewhat, but when it comes to Mexico, I don't think that's possible. I just don't see that happening. Mexico, it's different. Mexico, they need car manufacturing. They're not going to be able to compete with it in a country that's basically like a third world country, for example. It's just not going to happen with Mexico. Mexico is basically screwed no matter what in this scenario. Canada can try to basically fix themselves, but I just don't see it happening. Now, the reason I'm not talking about China, because I basically said China, we already know what's going to happen with China. Now, the losers for them, export-driven industries. Mexico and Canada depend heavily on exports to the U.S., especially Mexico. This is what I was saying, where over 75% of exports go to the U.S. Tariffs could lead to job losses and economic slowdowns, especially in those countries. This is why tariffs can be a good thing. Now, economic growth. Both countries could be slower GDP growth due to decreased trade with their largest partner, because it's the U.S. And geopolitical and long-term effects reshaped trade alliances. Mexico and Canada might deepen their partnerships outside of North America, which is possible, but remember, U.S. is basically their top partner, so it is kind of hard. Now, erosion of the USMCA, this is kind of an iffy thing, but I don't think it will happen. So a high tariff could strain the USMCA, basically that Trump put in, undermining the North American trade cooperation. That's true, but I don't think they disband whatsoever. I do think they'd maybe renegotiate, possibly. Now, global supply chain disruptions. A trade war would likely ripple through industries with integrated North American supply chains, such as automotive and aerospace. Now, who wins? In the short term, Mexico and Canada might suffer more immediate economic impacts due to their reliance on the U.S. market. However, the U.S. would face significant domestic backlash due to rising costs and potential political unrest, which is true, but in the short term, the good thing is it hurts Canada and Mexico severely. So if Trump's put these tariffs down, he can definitely get the trade. He can get the trade negotiations under control, but he can also get the cartels and stuff under control when it comes to Mexico. Now, long term, Mexico and Canada could adapt by diversifying their trade relationships, which is true, leaving the U.S. businesses more isolated in a globalized economy. In this case, the U.S. could be seen as the long-term loser if isolationism leads to diminished global competitiveness, which is true. But in trade wars, no one truly wins. Both sides suffer, which is true. That is also true. But in a sense, if Trump does these, these tariffs for one of these countries, I do think the U.S. wins if it's not long-term. Like, for example, if Trump puts these tariffs down, he gets better negotiations because of how much it's going to be affecting Mexico and Canada. I do think we will ultimately win in the end. Honestly, he might not even have to put the tariffs down because they're already negotiating. So he might be able to get it in track without even having to put tariffs down. That's also a solution he could figure out. But I do think in the short term, as long as Trump's presidency is now, I do think Canada and Mexico suffer more, and Canada and Mexico will have to get everything together that Trump wants. If they don't, they basically get demolished in tariffs, because that is a big partner of theirs. With China, it's different in my opinion. With China, it's very different. So China, in my opinion, I think is more like a literal trade war. Like, China is literally going to do a trade war, and not much else is going to be coming out of it, because it's basically a trade war. The only thing China can really do to get away from the 10% tariff is just do a trade negotiation. And they probably do like a slight one. But no one really wins when it comes to the China one, because they're literally basically the same size. And it does hurt U.S. consumers more. But for me, I would say with the China one, I would say try to negotiate and don't make it go too long. When it comes to Mexico and Canada, just push as hard as you can, because I think Canada and Mexico are going to crack at some point regardless. But that's how I feel about this. I just wanted to talk about this with you guys today. It was kind of interesting to talk about. I also wanted to kind of bring in some of my analysis and stuff. Hopefully my next video is my cabinet picks. The cabinet pick video I was going to talk about the deep analysis and everything. But I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really want to talk about these tariffs just to see what you guys think of it. How do you think of tariffs? In my opinion, I think tariffs are good and bad, but they can also be good depending on the country you do tariff. Like for example, Canada and Mexico. I think that's a great thing to tariff. You should definitely tariff Canada and Mexico, especially if there's problems in the U.S. because of those countries. And then when it comes to China, I think it's a little bit of an iffy scenario because you're basically hurting your consumers, but also you might get a tiny bit of a better trade negotiation. But either way, I do think it is still a good thing for Trump to put this forth. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comments how you feel. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. And my next video will probably be out in the next few days. I'll try to figure something out. If Trump hasn't finished his cabinet picks, I'll just do something else if I can find something online. But I do hope you guys have been enjoying the videos. I hope you enjoy this video as well. But anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.